We begin tonight with that breaking news. The state shutting down a well-known funeral home in the city of Detroit.
We have now learned 35 sets of cremated remains were discovered last night at an abandoned funeral home, an issue that is becoming shockingly familiar now to folks in Detroit.
If any of you watched our Abandoned Detroit documentary, you might recall me saying at the time I had just uncovered another Detroit funeral home and it had over 100 cremated remains in the basement. Well, that was actually Gates of Heaven, this exact funeral home. With Gates of Heaven Funeral Home being within stone's throw of perhaps the busiest intersection in southwest Detroit, I was pretty much on top of its closure. In 2019, I definitely noticed that business had pretty much ceased and there hadn't been any hearses parked there for quite some time. I can remember the one time I walked around to give it a check, I saw cameras everywhere, so I couldn't make any real attempts. I eventually made my way back to check it out, and lo and behold, magically the back door was open. Full of anxiety and not knowing exactly what to expect, I cautiously entered. After realizing I was the only person around, I ended up exploring the place. But at that time, I was still completely oblivious to what awaited me down in the basement. And from what I eventually did discover, could this possibly be yet another infamous Detroit funeral home of horrors? The funeral home, which was known as Gates of Heaven, operated out of a 4,000 square foot single family home during its approximate 20 years of business. Gates of Heaven Funeral Home opened for business around the year 2000. The owner converted the 1955 single-family home into a funeral business with a chapel, casket display room, visitation area, and embalming room on the main level. Upstairs is where the offices and a small living quarters were also located. The exact reason for the funeral home's closure still remains a bit of a mystery, but it does appear to have closed sometime around 2019. It seems that the Gates of Heaven Funeral Home initially enjoyed good success, but over time, eventually funeral services began to decline after a series of bad fortunes. First and foremost, the Gates of Heaven Funeral Home had been looked at several times in recent years due to complaints for the mistreatment of decedents' bodies and remains. Secondly, they had some rather shady business dealings and allegedly they owed vendors money. And finally, business really started to suffer after the irate clients began to express anger and frustration regarding god-awful customer service. I guess the customer is always right, and after making their opinions public, business nosedived in the late 2010s, and eventually the funeral home closed by 2020. So here's the embalming room at the Gates of Heaven Funeral Home, and you can see some tools and an embalming machine over here that still has arterial fluid inside. As we go over here toward the cabinets, there's a nice orange gurney chilling here. So it looks like these cabinets held all the random equipment and supplies that were used for body preparation. Here's some tissue filler and embalming fluid, and an old gross wooden head block. And then down here there's some brushes, combs, and some makeup. Looks like some dry seal for skin, and then more bottles of arterial fluid. As you can see, I was able to turn on the overhead light in here, so surprisingly, this place still has the electricity on. Let's get a close-up here at this nice porcelain table. And a nasty drain, of course. But it's always good to see a porcelain slab left. Gates of Heaven Funeral Home was a simple layout with the chapel serving as the building's centerpiece and the small embalming room tucked into the corner. But when I went downstairs, I made a grisly discovery when I found over 100 cremated remains. Some of them scattered on the floor in the most disrespectful way possible, and the majority of the others in various urns and containers stacked on a table. Knowing full well that this was not the first time, nor would it be the last time to find cremated remains, I wanted to do the right thing and contact the authorities so that these bodies could be returned to their families and loved ones. But I also knew that by doing so, that not only would the cremated remains soon be gone, but the funeral home would most likely be locked down after drawing inevitable attention. I wanted to capture what I had discovered so many times before, but just not in photographs, also on video. This was all just prior to me getting into making videos, so all I had was a GoPro at the time. But at least I had that because I was able to get back in and document everything that I saw, including those cremated remains, all on the GoPro. So that's the reason for the video footage being a bit shaky. However, I was sure glad that I made the decision. Shortly after notifying the authorities of the over 100 cremated remains in the basement of the funeral home, it appeared that they did come out and remove the remains and lock down the funeral home just as I thought they would. Now, I am in just complete awe over here, and it's so tragic and sad, but this is exactly why I feel so strongly about getting cremains back to their families. I can't just morally leave these here all forgotten about. They need to be with their loved ones. All cleaned out. And this is where the cremated remains were, look. All gone. They were right there on that table. So here's where the pews are now. Here's the chapel again, from the back. There's the casket. It never ceases to amaze me at what we find in these abandoned locations, and Gates of Heaven Funeral Home will forever remain one of the most shocking and grotesque explorers of all time. As of 2022, the funeral home continues to sit abandoned. However, it was recently sold, and they are currently cleaning everything else out. It sure will be interesting to see what comes at the former Gates of Heaven Funeral Home. And that'll take us to the end of yet another funeral home video from Abandoned Central. We sure hope that you guys enjoyed this one and keep the deceased families and loved ones in your thoughts and prayers, so hopefully one day they can return home. For more photographs from Gates of Heaven and our other locations, make sure you check out AbandonedCentral.com. And also, don't forget, subscribe to Abandoned Central on YouTube so that you don't miss any of our other videos. We truly appreciate all of your support. Thank you.